Hi, and welcome to Watch Me Code, episode 10. So, at some point in developing any plugin for Jenkins, you're going to reach the point where you want to be able to test the plugin. And we're kind of at that point now. We've got code that works, or at least appears to work, and we need to make sure that it's actually working as we intend, and we need to make sure that it doesn't regress as things change. So we need some way of testing that. Now, there are a number of different ways we can test these things. There's like already we've started getting some little small tests, and what we're doing here in these tests is we're actually going and making connections to the real server. Now, that could be acceptable. So the first thing here, we're dealing with testing an integration with another system. So we're always going to have some level of integration testing aspects. So we have a number of choices, right? We can do as we've done here in these two smoke tests, where we're just literally just connecting to the remote server and then relying on certain properties about that remote server being functioning. So in fact, for this one, we're not even actually testing things. We were just using it to experiment. And this test here is testing that we've got the correct timestamp. Now, the problem with that is that requires us to have an online connection to that service. And that can be problematic. So, like, if the service is offline, the test will fail, we can't do things. If the service is online, that's fine. If the service has rate limits or something like that, then we may not be able to continue testing because we may find our access blocked. So, for example, one of the problems we have with the GitHub branch source plugins is that if you write tests against GitHub, you very quickly hit the GitHub anonymous usage rate limits, and when you hit those, then your tests will start failing. And if you want to avoid the anonymous ones, you need to give a token in order to get a higher rate limit, but even that higher rate limit can be too low, and then you've got to find some ways of actually getting that token into the tests without persisting it in source control, and that becomes tricky for other people to be able to run tests because it means they've got more setup to do. So ideally, we'd like to avoid having to require that connection. Now, there are other ways we could do things. So in the case of the service we have here, Gitbox and these, it's actually running GetWeb. So, we've got that little giveaway there, that little icon, and if we view source, we should see it's saying GetWeb interface 272, copyright that, Git core binaries, and so on. So that gives us a number of options, right? One option we could do is we could say, right, let's set up a Docker container, and let's, in that Docker container, install GetWeb and some Git server, some Git repositories with some test data, and make sure that all that test data contains all the options we want. And then every time we run a test, let's make sure the Git container is available and run that up. Now, there is a way we can do that with Jenkins Docker fixtures. So we could use Docker fixtures in order to provide that functionality. That requires you to do things. So what that typically ends up looking like is you're going to have tests that will have some sort of thing where you say, hey, I want a Docker, and you copy some files in, and then you can start up Docker. These are testing the actual Docker fixture, but like ideally what you end up with is something like this, or this as your Docker fixture, and then you can then use those as containers within your tests, and actually use those containers to actually generate things. So that's one option we have. There's another option we can use, and that is relying on the fact that GetWeb CGI bin. So GetWeb is actually using the CGI bin protocol. So another option we could do is we could say, all right, let's just set up our Git containers and use a GetWeb server. And in fact, in a lot of cases in Jenkins, you're running Jenkins. And so what we can do is, here's one I created earlier in a different window size. So let's hide this. Hide this. There we go. GetWeb. So what we can do with this, close others. What we can do with this is we can have a Jenkins extension that exposes a non-protected root action, and on that I've said, hey, map them all CGI bin, and then I do a dynamic thing that goes and says, hey, do all this, and then I have a CGI request that basically sets all the environment variables expected for that, and then does the appropriate handling, which is fun, and then that does all the reading of that. And if I, bear with me 1 second, if I run, so if I do that, what you end up with is localhost 8080. There we go. So in this case, we end up with this CGI, and that's giving me this. But if I go GetWeb CGI, we're now calling GetWeb CGI on a set of repositories that I've configured locally, and so that would allow us to have a set of locally configured repositories that were part of, as it were, set up by the Git checkout or set up by the test, and we could then test all the various different endpoints and so on, and we could test various different pieces of functionality there and see the bits that we're after and make sure that everything behaves accordingly. So that would be a very nice and really good way of testing. It means we don't have to worry so much about having Docker containers, but it does have some restrictions. So the first restriction that actually hits upon us is that we need to have Perl. So we need a Perl because I'm going to have to invoke Perl and that, and then there's a whole pile of Perl dependencies that we need in order to have CGI bin. So that's going to push a lot of dependencies on us. And then, and this is more of an Apache specific constraint, we actually have to include GetWeb CGI. And this is the piece of information that means we can't use this approach for this specific plugin. So we would be including in the source code for this ASF Git Pub Sub Jenkins plugin some GPL-v2 code, and Apache it would be a lot harder. Now, it would be test resources, but it would still be harder for us to actually get that source code into the Apache Foundation because it would be containing GPL-v2 and we'd have to put in notices and all sorts of other things. So it's probably not what we want to be doing there in that regard in terms of the program being licensed GPL-v2. Yes, we can distribute the source code, but it's just adding extra complexity. And so that's that one. So we've covered Docker, we've covered the fact that in this case it's the CGI bin, and we could use some CGI bin trickery to get a test instance of that. So there is another way we could do things. We could say, okay, let's just fake out requests. And by faking out requests and giving it fake data, we could test various different combinations. Now that's fine, but it would be much nicer if we didn't have to write all that fake data, and it would be much nicer if that fake data wasn't actually as fake. And so that's the approach we're going to use here. We're going to use what's known as a mocking tool, but one that allows us to mock a real server by actually capturing real requests of that real server. Now, we have to be careful about whether we can do that or not, because if the server is stateful, or if the data we're trying to capture is stateful, then by using a mock, we're going to miss out on that. And then as the service evolves, if there's new functionality, the mocks may have to be updated. So the mocks are only as useful as the backing service is reasonably static, but they do give us the advantage of dependable, stable tests that we can actually test against. And that, to me, is a good value here. And they run offline or online, and that's also a value. So we're going to use, there's a number of different ways we can use things. I'm going to use a specific tool, which I find is reasonably good when you meet all the criteria required for using it, and that tool is WireMock. So to use WireMock, we're going to need to add a test dependency. So wire. Now, if you're using WireMock, there are two flavors of WireMock. There's one flavor that is using the Maven dependencies and brings in all the dependencies along that. And then there's another one, which is called WireMock Standalone, where it has shaded all the dependencies. Now, because Jenkins uses Jetty, and because WireMock uses Jetty, we actually want this standalone version rather than the other version, because if we pick the other version, we'll end up with class path conflicts with Jenkins, and that will then cause our tests to have strange behavior. So this gets us here, and so let's start by writing a navigator. ASF get navigator code navigate, go to test, create a test. Okay, well, let's see, we're going to want to test visit sources. So public wire mock rule, wire new wire mock rule, WireMock rule is WireMock config. There we go. So dynamic port. So that's that one, and then we put that rule. Now we're going to start by recording. Now, yes, so there is one thing that's really handy, and that is we just take the server and we assume the server is one of those two, which is actually a good thing for us, because it means we can actually fake it out with a different server for ourselves. So new directory. With WireMock, when we're recording, it's going to want to put things in certain directories. So if we go resources / files, and another one, directory mapping. I think it's mappings. We'll find out. So wire dot start recording record spec dot. So the service we're working against is in effect stateless for us. So when there are repeated requests for the same URL, it should serve the same content. For target, right? So let's go back here. Let's go with GetWeb. So that one. So for target, ignore repeat requests, and then choose body type match automatically. Now by default, stubs should be persistent, if I remember correctly, but let's just check. Persistent stub starts as true, so that's fine. Right, so that's that one, and then at the end, we're going to try, finally, wire, no, stop recording. So that stop recording is what saves the actual recording we've done. And now let's get ourselves an instance, new ASF Navigator. Now at this point we need the URL, so it's going to be http localhost colon plus wire port plus slash. Now we want the rest of the URL, repos ASF. Instance. This is the instance under test. And instance dot visit sources. Context listener. So context, we're going to need a context. This is where stuff gets fun. So we need a project observer. No project observer. It's fine. New log task listener. Info, and now this context. Let's cheat and use that one for now and see what we get happening. So we have files and we have mappings. So at this point, we've actually got this repos ASF, and you can see there's a file with all the various pieces of information in it. And here's the request. So we got this request, it tells us the body file name, tells us the date, and all that information. Let's make this more visible. So we can get rid of that one. No. So you can see there's the information about the request, and there's the information about this. And so this is the file we've got. And now at this point, we now just have to actually figure out what we want to test. So let's look at what we've got in the Navigator. So in terms of actual critical functionality that we need to test, we've got the server and it visits sources, and it's got the proposal and so on. And then we've got this trait descriptor stuff, that's just that. They're fairly standard. The only actual bit of logic is in here in terms of what ones it ends up proposing. So if request process, and then we need to say, okay, we've got the source builder, we've got the record, but that's all just logging. So really, we just want to make sure that we get the repositories out and we get asked for each one. So the observer should get asked for each one. So at this point, we've actually done the recording, and it should. I'm going to turn off my Wi-Fi. So let's just check my Wi-Fi is off. GetWeb. No internet connection. And now let's run the test again. And you can see it's gone and actually passed. So we now need to just put in the appropriate tests, and then that covers that Get SEM Navigator. And I'm going to put my Wi-Fi back on. And then we just need to add in this file and this file. And so that covers SEM Navigator. Let's just check. So I'm going to just take this bit and just stuff it down here. That. There we go. Right. So we want to know what ones were actually observed. So right. Set. Reset. And let's go with observed and project name. Factor. This I'm not happy with, but as far as I remember, it's not actively used. And then we need a getter. Right. So source probe. Insert that probe. Get observed as item is Maven. Okay. And then, so, given instance with filters when visit sources, then Maven found. Right. Let's add more test. With filter. Then Maven not found. So instance set traits. clean up the list. New. Wildcard source filter trait. And we go with star. Even star. Even star. Yeah. And not as item. Now, right, so at this point we're actually hitting a null pointer exception, and that's because specifically we've hit the point where we need a Jenkins instance. So at this point we're also going to need at role public Jenkins rule J new Jenkins rule. I only need this for running the tests. I just need to have a Jenkins. I don't actually care what that Jenkins is, so I'm going to just tell it I don't care. And let's go with owner. So I just want to, I'm not happy with that null pointer exception. So I'm just going to go and create one. So j.create project. We got one of these. Okay. Mock. Stands item. So we need these guys. Jobs, this, get sources, and this, get sources null, on source updated, source criteria is null. Constructor, that's going to be public. And we're going to need a descriptor. Top level item descriptor. Test. So at test extension allows you to register an extension, but only for tests. And so when you do at test extension, it registers the extension only within the class for which it was done. And we can return new instance, mock SEM new, and item group next. Oh yes, that's right. Top level item and source owner. And oh, that gives us more methods. So top level item descriptor is going to be extension list lookup top level item descriptor class get. There we go. So that should be enough to give us an owner, and then we can mock SEM source owner, and we can say owner equals there, and then down here get context becomes owner. Meh. I'm not even happy with that. Final context. Constructor parameter. There's that one. So that's that guy. And this one. Private list. Well, actually, no, we don't care. Yes, that's fine. We do want a criteria. There's criteria. We have a getter for. So we've got ourselves this guy can be owner, and this guy can be owner. And now let's move this back to being a rule. Get rid of that one. This can now be there, and this can now be there. Right. Run again. J must not be static. Okay. So at this point, we're now firing up a wire mock, and we're firing up a Jenkins. So there we go. We've got both tests passing. They're the ones for SEM Navigator. That seems cool. Grab this bit here. Close this. And now we need to go back to SEM file system test. So Navigator test had this guy. Let's go back to file system test. Put in the wire mock. So let's do this here. Wire mock. Okay. And open up that. So file system test. We're saying here maybe git timestamp there. Let's go record some tests. Something going on. I'm mistaken that. No. GetWeb. Yes, Apache. Get timestamp. Build template with remote. Here we go. So this is going to be slightly harder. We're getting this unknown remote here. So what we need is now some way of getting this into something a bit better. So what we really want now is to make this more testable for us. So if we go at private, well, let's go at static final list string. And this would be GetWeb hosts. New array list. Arrays as list. What happened there? Right. So let's get web hosts. And now for S is string and get web hosts. This guy, right, for string S web hosts. If remote starts with S, prefix, turn true. So there's that one. Are we doing anything else? Yeah, so that's those ones. And let's look at what we're doing on this file. So what we're doing here is we're just augmenting this guy here to allow us to tweak the list of hosts. Because it's going to be a static final, the test is going to allow us to actually modify that list. So we now need to put in, yes, includes ASF. Slash. There we go. So we want this guy. So we're going to have to go with at before inject mock server. ASF get file system GetWeb host add. And after move mock server. Remove server root URL. There we go. And then this becomes server root URL plus, we can get rid of that guy. Let's maybe get, there we go. Let's run this test again. And there's that. And if we look here, we now have this URL that gives us the information for the timestamp, and we have this URL here that gives us the request. So those, and so that's kind of how we can get a lot of the testing of remote URL requests. So rather than bore you with all the tests that need to be written, I'm going to leave it at this point, and then I'm going to add some tests outside of this. Basically, it's mostly about just adding these tests. So I can now remove this, I can remove this, and it will now, I want to remove that code because this is the code. So basically, this is the code for the mock capture. And so you just need to keep bringing that around as you write each test. So this now gives us that test, and we can work each one as we go through and cover the appropriate bits and pieces. So I'll see what tests have interesting implications and what ones don't, and we'll continue from there.